episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome once again, everybody, to another really fascinating episode with a fascinating guest for you today, helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us on many different fronts. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Dina Radenkovic, who is both an academic physician as well as a medical technology entrepreneur, working in the field of the computational biology of aging. Dr. Radenkovic is also a partner at the Salt Bio Fund, was a co-founder of Hooke, which is an elite longevity research clinic in London. She has dual degrees in both medicine and physiology from University College London Medical School, did her residency at St. Thomas Hospital in London. She has led a variety of projects over the years, including but not limited to a digital therapeutics company for women, as well as a company focused on algorithms for cardiac MRI-based fractal geometry, both which entered major industry acquisitions. Later, she was working as research fellow at King's College London and at Harvard University. She currently has over 30 academic papers, 7 grants, over 40 scientific conference presentations. Aside from that, she's fluent in 5 languages, as well as 3 programming languages. A lot of exciting things that she's involved in. So it's kind of really interesting discussion today. Dr. Dina Radenkovic, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while.
No, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I truly enjoyed some of the previous podcasts that you've had since you've launched this. So it's an honor to be here today.
Well, I think we're going to create an enjoyable episode today for a lot of people to watch. So this is exciting. I've really been looking forward to it. And as we typically do, and I would love to sort of start things off by handing things over to you just to talk a little bit more about yourself, everything, if you can go into where you grew up, how you got interested in medicine, and how ultimately longevity became an interest to you and a little bit of that early career journey. I think that'd be a great way to start things off. Please take the floor.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can start from we can go back into the past as much as you want. I actually am originally 200 years old. I just I take a lot of NMN and
you look pretty good for 200.
No, I wish. I'm still struggling with the time restricted feeding. But I mean, the reason why I speak 5 languages is because I come from like a very multicultural background. So originally I was born in South Serbia, and lived in Serbia and Greece and in the UK and multiple cities in the US. I spent some time in the Middle East. So I guess kind of learning languages was a byproduct of that international school upbringing. And I realized that I love science at a very young age. I went to many competitions in math and physics and chemistry and biology, did really well. I was like a professional athlete, but for science competitions. And I finished school at 14 and did 2 years of kind of mathematical high school. But I always thought that mathematics was a way of life, a way of thinking. And where I grew up, I wasn't really exposed to cutting edge technology, to be honest. Like I've learned to code in Pascal, and I'm not that old. I did not discover the cure for aging, which was a bit of an obsolete programming language at the time. And did not know that venture capital or hedge funds exist. Like that's like the terminology I've learned in my late teens in the UK. And so I was like, what would I do to apply this knowledge of mathematics? And I was thinking between astrophysics or something in biology. And that time I took a human biology class. So it was the year when I was 14 to 15, and I went to the competition. And I did a lot of dissection. I was looking at the smooth muscle and skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle and how they differ. And I was fortunate. I mean, my father is a professor of histology and embryology, so he spent a lot of time like thinking and looking through tissues under the microscope. And I really, really enjoyed those interactions. So I was like, that's it. I'm going to study biology in medicine, actually, and I'm going to apply kind of these mathematical principles to biology. So I did my GCSEs and A levels, again, at a bit of a shorter period of time. And I wanted to go direct to medical school, which is why The UK was the number one option for me. So I did firstly like a pre-medicine course at Oxford, and then I studied medicine at UCL, which was an incredible experience. So I guess kind of moving forward, I really enjoyed my time studying medicine. It was always, I think I was always fascinated by the science, and occasionally I would feel that I'm learning so much and identifying so many problems, but that I'm not really equipped with like the solutions to these problems. And I felt that I was like, oh, I should have perhaps gone to engineering. Like, I don't really know what I'm going to do about all these problems that I'm now aware of. So I've always realized that, so it was kind of that time in my second year, I realized that I would like to do something more about it, and rather than necessarily practice medicine, that could perhaps look at a more technical or engineering approach to solve some of the problems that I've identified by learning more of medicine. And it was at the time that I got into the F Factor, like founder forum competition, which was a bit like X Factor for STEM. So led by Brent Hoberman and like leading technology entrepreneurs, people like Richard Branson, Eric Schmidt are there. And we even had Simon Cowell as one of the judges. So they really made it like the X Factor, but for STEM. So that kind of really accelerated my career, opened the world of technology. My first startup was started through that journey. And I really kind of going through, after that, I did go back into medical training. I was always interested in metabolic disease, preventive cardiology. Sure. So I've started doing a lot of work on atherosclerosis. I published a few interesting papers. I was nominated as a young investigator award of the European Society of Cardiology. Really by studying atherosclerosis, applying some of the big data approaches, so using the UK Biobank, the NHANES, like again, a large data set from Harvard, working with some of the brightest professors, both from Harvard, from University College London, King's College, and globally, was that I kind of started looking at these lipids and atherosclerosis and good and bad cholesterol ratios as risk factors for atherosclerosis, which is obviously this accumulation of inflammation and fats around our blood vessels that starts in adolescence. And it turned out that all of these things were linked to the immune system. So I was like, wait. I thought I passed my immunology exams 7 years ago, and I was a young academic doctor at the time. And I was like, well, it seems that like the LDL and HDL are linked to APO to T helper cells and CD cells. And I realized that instead of kind of looking at treating atherosclerosis as a single disease, we should focus on addressing like the causes of the causes. So the root pathways that cause both atherosclerosis, type 2 diabetes, many metabolic cancers, particular endometrial, colon, right? And then dementia and even age-related macular degeneration. So that thesis was very much aligned with the Buck Institute for Research in Aging. Where I spent some time and I have a post there, and that kind of opened up my field of how do we bring in this preventative longevity medicine that focuses on preventing, but also reversing these aging pathways that then cause all these chronic conditions. So that's how I got in the field, and I've been active and, wearing multiple hats in it, but I've stayed in kind of this field of aging ever since, because I think it's the impact that you can have by preventing something and kind of breaking some of the compromises that we often take in life is just huge. And I like to tackle some of these most challenging issues, as I used to call it.
Outstanding. Anyway, as I'm listening to you talk about this journey, it's really fascinating because, we sort of sit in this evolving area, what I'll sort of term longevity biotech, where there's a lot of action going on in terms of the development of these new magic bullets for various components of the aging process, disease of aging, however we want to categorize it. A lot of money being thrown at it. These therapies will be coming down the pike, but you're pointing out something extremely important. You just mentioned preventative longevity medicine, that there is medical practice out there, and I'm looking at one of the primary practitioners of it. Medicine doesn't stop. You're learning things, as you were just saying. You treat cholesterol, but wait a second, you're realizing these connections in your medical practice. CNS, the immune system. Talk a little bit about the role of the longevity medical practitioner in this equation, because I think we miss that part of it with everything going on over here, sort of in the research domain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, there's just so much to say about all that, and that's probably like a podcast on its own. But the field of aging is growing, is booming. As you said, there's finally a lot more interest. I think COVID has accelerated in the research going into aging, and also shown the importance of having a biologically healthy and biologically young population, regardless of chronological age. And we recently published a paper in Nature Aging that came out just last week, which talks exactly about that. Like, how can we use anti-aging interventions, whether they are medications or even lifestyle interventions like fasting, they could potentially be used as immune boosters together with our effective vaccines to make people produce stronger antibody response and just be more resilient to any pathogens, including COVID-19, right? So that's obviously like a growing field, but you're right. I think, you know, we live right now, and we need medical care, and we experience medical issues, right? Like if we both spend today just reading about aging and then doing podcasts, and we're sitting and we don't go out, like there's certain, these biological processes are happening within our bodies. And I think what I've identified is that as we wait for some of the groundbreaking things to really, you know, come into clinical practice, and there are many that are happening right now, like we're seeing epigenetic programming, iPSCs, CRISPR, like many others. But like, what can we do right now to live longer? And that field is just incredibly saturated with both good science, but also a lot of hype, some area of kind of wellness, lifestyle. Different professionals have been in it, and I think people are a bit confused, and rightly so. But there's definitely a need right now, as we wait for these technologies to emerge and be tested and licensed for appropriate indication, is that we need to have something like a sound engine of like critical appraisal of everything that's being published, and then a personalization like funnel, like how does this apply to me? There are certain building blocks, I think, of longevity medicine that pretty much most people would agree on. And that is, you know, we should be proactive rather than reactive. And that does mean, you know, seeing your doctor a bit more than, you know, as when you're having alarming symptoms, having regular checkups, knowing your numbers of basic things like your blood sugar, cholesterol, vitamin D status, and so on. Perhaps, you know, knowing what you're genetically predisposed to. So there are a lot of direct-to-consumer genetic testing things, a certain element of looking after your mental health as well. And I think that is something that is finally getting destigmatized, that we need to just look after physical and mental health as well. And then a little bit of exercise adapted, you know, to your lifestyle. So again, not overconsumption of calories. I recently saw a Twitter thread that, again, by our colleagues in the aging field saying, oh, is even fasting proven for humans? Because it's true that extreme fasting and calorie restriction in some species shorten lifespan. Mm-hmm. Kind of the groundbreaking mice studies that are often quoted about increase in lifespan are kind of taking as universal. But the reason why I'm often say that a bit of fasting will probably be good for you is because we live in a pretty much diabetogenic society in which we just have so much surplus of food, and we all eat 15 hours a day in like the, you know, the standard snacking diet. And everybody who's ever spent like a day in the lab knows that mice get the most fat once they are fed on like the so-called cafeteria diet. So you just let them snack all the time. So for that reason, I think there have been many studies like the calorie study to show that definitely being obese is not great for you. There are metabolic elements of healthy obesity, but again, not overconsumption of calories, whether it was with some fasting or not. I'd probably say that there are benefits of certain types of fasting regimens. And then having like eating just like less processed food that is not too high in sugar, obviously. Although I personally do have a sweet tooth. Again, vaccinations. I found a few things. So I wore the continuous glucose, the levels monitor, and I found a few things that are personalized kind of for me that do not cause too many spikes, but it's always a battle. And so again, like preventive vaccines, certain supplements. So it's almost like there are a couple of these things and a couple of these interventions that are building blocks, and then we can personalize them based on our needs, based on our risk factors. And that is really the purpose of good longevity medicine today, to be kind of a consultant on the healthcare journey and to enable people to engage with their health earlier on before they're developing symptoms, and do only things that are beneficial to them and not harmful. Right? Mm-hmm. So I probably, I guess, stop there, and then we can dive deeper into it.
No, that was wonderful. No, it was spot on, and it leads into my next, thinking about once again the practice of medicine and then creative sort of models. I was reading something recently that you had written, and it was I'm very interested in sort of, as many people out there are, sort of the creative models to get that information, especially in humans. And so if we sort of sit here and thinking about on one end of sort of longevity, we have sort of biomarkers and epigenetic clocks and stuff here. Over here is this 20-year-long study where we're studying people that are 50, and we'll look at them when they're 70. I saw you write something recently about, and then obviously nothing confidential here, but where you're looking fascinatingly at ovarian aging. Where you've targeted and say, this is a type of aging where we don't have to wait till somebody's 70 years old. It happens, we know sort of when it happens, specifically in this population. And if we can maybe target clinical development around this period of time in a woman's life, this may be a much faster way to have clinical data in humans that is relevant to something, as opposed to just a bunch of data or waiting a really long time. Talk a little bit about some of what you're doing in the area of ovarian aging and how we can use some of these creative clinical models to learn things.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I guess I always try to, again, go back to causes of the causes of the causes. And as I got into aging, I certainly, menopause is an accelerated aging process. It was something that personally I feel very strongly about. I'm like, I was not contented to this at birth. I better do something about this. It's not something I want to go through. And I've honestly realized that many of our male colleagues just do not they do not understand. They're not aware of these issues. It's not really being malicious and neglecting it for any bad intentions. There's just kind of this lack of deep awareness of some of these problems. So I worked very closely with Dr. Jennifer Garrison, who I think is coming to also one of your podcasts.
Yep.
And together we really bonded, and we realized that we want to do more in this space. And then when you look at the ovaries and ovarian aging, it's just such a great model. Like, it was only by accident that we've discovered some of the things that we wanted to test to delay aging, right? Mm-hmm. Like supplements like NAD boosters. There's some efficacy of NAD boosters. We're still learning what's the dosing, when, how, but they're certainly acting on some of these aging pathways, and we can see it in mice. And then we saw oh wow, these mice are just not losing oocytes. And then I was like, wait, so we always talk about the right model to study something. You mentioned it, right? Like, why don't we have so many tested aging interventions? We've been talking for decades. Oh, metformin is a longevity drug. There are some indications, but we still haven't proven it. And there was this whole idea, we'll do the TAME study. Then people were like, okay, we either need to do a study that lasts 50 years, or we need to, as you said, find an aging biomarker that we know predicts either mortality, morbidity, that we all agree on. So that was the whole idea about using either epigenetic clocks or a single clock or a functional clock. The other option was okay, what other models of aging can we use? So apart from mice, we look at naked mole rats, right? They don't age there under the ground.
Yep.
We look the experiments on C. elegans, right? That's where the DAF genes come. There are experiments on aging in bees. There are experiments there are people that are looking into whales, because it's only us and 2 types of whales that experience menopause. there was actually there are a few interesting companies like Loyal, some other initiatives, like I think the Dog Aging Project, that recently received some funding from, a few prominent philanthropists, like using dogs to study aging because they have shorter life expectancy. But then it made me think, okay, we have this organ that is human, like it's a human model of aging, and it has such a short life expectancy. Like you could really recruit a woman who's 32 and follow her to 35, which is considered geriatric age for ovaries. And you could see the like how ovarian aging takes place. You could conduct a 5-year randomized control trial and show and demonstrate clinically that some of these aging pathways can be targeted and modified by all of these, or some of these interventions that we talk about all the time, like NAD boosters, metformin, rapamycin, and rapalogs, and a few others. So it made me think, not only would this be a great model to study aging in humans, but also like resolving it would increase, the female reproductive lifespan and thus life expectancy, and would like impact, half of the population. So that's one of the reasons why I think I got involved with it, because it just seemed like something so obvious that was just not picked up before. Obviously kind of the potential consequences and the benefits of that research on women around the world and their health, their choices, their lives. Don't get me started. That can be like a separate question, but that's kind of the concept behind it. And what we're seeing is that all of the pathways, we know that transplantation of young ovarian tissue can have that effect. So, there are some girls who, this is already in clinical practice, right? Like this has been done. I've seen it even in medical school, is that some girls, for example, if they have like a childhood cancer, so let's say like a common childhood cancer is like a leukemia, so like ALL, like acute lymphoid leukemia, they would have part of the ovary, so the organ, not egg cells, they're not yet producing, they haven't had the menarche, they haven't had their first period. We can extract ovarian tissue, and then we can freeze that. They can undergo chemotherapy, which has very good remission and cure rates, actually. And then they can after their puberty, once they enter puberty and afterwards in later life, have that ovarian tissue grafted, so reinserted back. Okay. And that ovarian tissue can they can be fertile, and then they can also have delayed menopause. So we know that there's something that this young ovarian tissue can rejuvenate to the old ovarian tissue. So there's some factors that are sent to the ovary and to the brain as well, mediating this communication. So we could perhaps isolate these factors and delay the age of menopause and increase lifespan and slow down female aging that is happening at such an accelerated pace. And that is, something we discuss in aging in general, right? Like if we could study it in the ovary, which has got such a short lifespan, we could potentially replicate it in other tissue, because your liver is aging, your heart is aging, your brain is aging, right? It's just, there are multiple studies on this idea of parabiosis, right? Like connecting a young mouse to an old mouse, exchanging their blood. There are even some clinics in the world like offering young plasma and blood exchange, right? So that not only that we could use this to address menopause, but we could potentially study the entire process, for an entire field of aging. So I thought that was fascinating, and that's why we got a bit more involved into that field.
Really exciting area. Dina, you've mentioned it, and you've published on a lot of these areas. I went to PubMed and I was looking at some of your papers in terms of, you have reviews on time-restricted eating strategies and NAD you were mentioning, of course, the COVID topic. But recently, you published a chapter, and there's a new book, Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, and you're involved in the chapter AI and Longevity Medicine. And obviously AI is a very hot topic. We've had some guests on talking about AI and drug discovery recently. Walk us through a little bit about, it's such a hot topic. What are you most excited about in terms of AI, machine learning, and some of these more advanced tools in terms of not just discovering new therapies, but for longevity medical practice?
Well, thank you for asking. I was really excited to see that finally online, and obviously very grateful to my collaborators, so Dr. Alex Jabaranka,
Hmm.
and Evelyn Biskup and Dr. Kaiko Lee, who was kind of mentoring us through the process. I mean, I love computational medicine. That was my background. That's why I applied to aging, and I'm excited about this new technologies. But I guess I would break it down into, I think, three principles. And if this gets too technical, please let me know. I'll try to not get too technical so that it's hopefully understandable. But in we have so many problems with the use of AI in healthcare. Like,
Yeah.
but one of the issues is that, I mean, we have like longevity clinics. There are a few of these longevity clinics coming up, right? Some of them do testing from omics to push-ups, like, you know, we mentioned Hooke, some of the work we do at the Buck, right?
Hmm.
They have very good but small data sets. Now, the issue is that, I mean, to use any machine learning, we need some data. And the problem is that, like, we don't have data that is, I mean, large enough. We don't have it like longitudinally on big samples. So the issue was like, how can we use maybe these small data sets that we can collect and for short follow-up and maximize their use? So one aspect was this whole idea about using federated or split learning. And that is, so that's the first thing we discussed. And that really just means like being able to train algorithms on multiple data sets as if they're together, but you're not really sharing the data. So it essentially, and it's used in finance already, and it's getting more used in healthcare, is that essentially you then break the barriers of data sharing in healthcare, which are so focused around confidentiality.
Right.
Because people just seem to, you know, be more open about sharing stuff around their finance, but not about, you know, their risk for dementia or, you know, a sexually transmitted infection they've had, you know, 5 years ago. So it just, the idea that it would allow us to have these algorithms as if we're sharing the data, but we're not sharing the actual data points.
Hmm.
So that was the kind of the first option that is now getting a bit more increasing use in oncology in particular, so for cancer, and there are a few companies that are doing that. The issue there is that it's still not big enough for most conditions, right? Even if we do this kind of potentially federated learning, but it's an option. The second thing that I thought was very creative and that we mentioned is use of like things like called GANs, and that's essentially like a method that we already use. So let's say like I have a data set of I don't know, 5 photos which have yellow buses. So if I train an algorithm on that data set of 5 photos of yellow buses, my algorithm would probably only be able to recognize yellow buses. But if I use this like GANs method, I'll be able to augment, so expand that data set into like generate some synthetic data, so fake data around that data set. And I could perhaps recreate buses that are yellow, green, and red as well. And then my then algorithm trained on the data set would be able to recognize buses of all colors. So I've managed to do that. So could we use some small data sets that are very clean from some research clinics, and then use that to generate synthetic data set? So let's say if this was, I don't know, 20,000 people, this is what the results would be. Now, it's not, you know, this is again an oversimplistic explanation of this. So I'm sure some AI experts, you know, please forgive me.
You're doing great.
Technical setting, but that's kind of the idea. Now, are we going to allow clinical trials on synthetic data? You know, are we going to when is that going to happen? Are we going to start approving drugs on synthetic data sets or semi-synthetic data sets? That's, again, an interesting point. And then the third thing we discussed is that how can we use, I mean, just deep learning in particular to create this aging clocks? Because there are a lot of data that we produce now. I mean, we can wear wearables, we can do our genetic whole genome sequencing, we can test our epigenome, we can test all of our bloods. We can collect, I mean, everything, like the entire fingerprint of digital fingerprint, like the phenome. So each person produces a lot of data that we capture right now. So can we use that to kind of create like a multi-clock, which will then give this measure of biological aging, so that, you know, if over is done, end up being the only method, that we can again develop surrogate biomarkers of aging. So we could do a 4-year study of, I don't know, rapamycin and, say, oh, this multi-beat clock has been reversed by 5 years. So that means that this person just got 20 years of healthy life expectancy. So this is an anti-aging drug. So it's, again, a very brief chapter, but it just talks about how we could potentially use AI in this novel field of longevity medicine. But I think it's a good first step in, because we want to get more, talented bioinformaticians, doctors with an interest in the field, as well as engineers who are going to, think this is a problem worth solving and an area worth pursuing. So hopefully at least it kind of stimulates the discussion and gets more people interested in this space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dina, my social media feed is pretty boring normally, and 99% of the stuff I just scroll through. But last week I'm sitting there scrolling through, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a picture of Dr. Dina Radenkovic and Paris Hilton that comes across my Facebook. I'm like, wow, what's this? And it alerted me to the fact that, you were at the SALT conference, which is this fascinating global thought leadership networking forum where the titans of industry and academia and government all hang out and talk about important things in tech and finance and so forth for a couple of days. Talk about what you were doing at SALT. Talk about what the SALT BioFund is all about, how that got started. Take us into this interesting area for what you're doing as well, if you would.
Yeah, well, I have to say first that I really enjoyed my first in-person conversation with Paris, and that she knew a lot about and had a great interest in female reproductive longevity and oocyte and embryo freezing. So I was very, very, very impressed. I think obviously I had a great time at SALT, and SALT did start more so kind of addressing the leaders in finance industry, but over time it has really evolved into as you said, like a global a leadership forum, which tackles issues from geopolitics and finance, some of the new waves in finance like cryptocurrencies, but also heavily involved in life sciences. And that is really where, I play a role. So we've had at the SALT conference just last week in New York at the Javits Center, we've had multiple panels on aging science, longevity, programmable biology, innovation in food as well as health. Mm-hmm. And we are both in promoting and investing and supporting and launching through the SALT platform companies in this field of programmable biology with a particular focus on longevity. I think what is excellent about SALT, and which is something that I love to do as well, is really this cross hybridization of people from different disciplines, right? Like when you go to an aging conference, we all like know each other, and it's great, but often and it's still a small field, that often people are like, everybody has a company and a post and everybody knows each other. And whereas when you go to something like big as SALT, like you can learn from other people. You can learn branding from Paris Hilton, and you can make your direct to consumer telemedicine longevity company desirable and wanted by millions of people who will then improve their lives, because you're making it something that they want to do and they find fun and enjoyable, right? Like you could learn how to financially model your company so that you can, develop multiple drugs and de-risk it for some of the finance experts, right? Like you could talk about your idea, shape the public perception about it, make people more receptive, attract talent for recruitment, but also investors. So I think that is something that I really think is the value of the SALT ecosystem, and why we had such a great time, because the networking and that comes out of it, and the collaborations and partnerships that come after every SALT event are really, really fascinating. And I think it only happens when you have that much diversity at one place. Yep. So we have one in the US every year. This one was in New York, and really to kind of support the revival of New York City post the pandemic. And then we do one in the Middle East. Next one's going to be in March. Again, big interest, huge interest there in health and both food tech, seen as issues of national importance. And then normally one in Asia this year, probably in Singapore, but we don't have that date confirmed. So really kind of try to keep this a global, very diverse and inclusive forum. And I guess I'm a hybrid of my mother is in fashion. She went to Miss Universe. My father is a professor in biology. So And my mother always taught me, whatever you develop there in science, whatever is a product, even if it's a medical product that people need to use, they need to love it and needs to, feel good. So I always thought that area of, your how you tell your story and how it feels for people and what it means to them should not ever be neglected. And I think it's an important part of product development. So I think I really enjoyed it. I think we had a great conference. Hopefully we're going to have a lot of things even released online. But it's kind of just the beginning of using and leveraging the SALT ecosystem to support more entrepreneurs in the life sciences field.
And so very important and needed in this day and age. Along that line, I know that in a couple of days, you are going to be speaking at the Longevity Investors Conference. The topic of your platform there will be how to invest in longevity startups. And this is another very interesting time. We have so much going on in terms of longevity seed funds and these larger holding companies of longevity assets, and all sorts of things are happening, which I don't really understand with the crypto. What are you going to be talking about at the conference? What excites you in terms of the current state of longevity finance? What are you concerned about? Take us a little bit on that journey as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really excited about that meeting. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say yet, but I think really the idea is to, I guess, map out my view of investing and supporting in these companies in this field of longevity. The first thing, I mean, it's a very poorly defined area. It's more poorly defined as something like mild cognitive impairment or long COVID, right? Like it's very, very vague. What falls into that longevity medicine. I think I'm quite fortunate that I had experience in science and wet labs. In clinical medicine, I was still working in a hospital for some time, not a very long period, but I witnessed and had patients on hospital wards. And so I always look at it in a very translational way. And I think what we try and do is that when we look at these opportunities is really see are they solving a real medical problems that patients see as a big problem. So always fast tracking that translation and how can we reach the clinical translation as soon as possible. The second thing that we look at is how can we, traditional biotech was a bit like finding true love. It's very binary. It might work. There's a plausible pathophysiological mechanism, but it's still likely, you go for it, it can work or not, and still statistically most likely not going to work, right? And it's how can we remove that binary outcome, right? Can we have more of a platform approach? Could there be the IP is strong in the technology, and then you might spend some time looking for applications of that technology. That's the one. And then often we like opportunities that is actually innovation in software that is applied to a biological problem, right? I think we really are at this stage of coding biology. We're seeing flourishing of companies in this space. When we had Ginkgo Bioworks last Friday, Jason Kelly was actually at Salt just before Kevin taking his company public, right? One of the largest biotech IPOs, right? So we're entering that era of coding biology and being able to, not just evolve by natural selection, but by technical manipulation. And I think, what tech has done to move advertising online, and now is the time to actually do something in healthcare. So that's really the idea, this intersection of software and biology, where software innovation is solving a biological problem. Rarely, in kind of a single drug assets approach, although sometimes it happens. And then, the other thing is, aging is not classified as a disease, and it's now a hot topic. I feel that companies that just say, oh, we found this aging pathway in some animal model that probably does not replicate, human disease. We talked about, why ovaries are a human model of aging, right? There are some models that just are not great. Bleomycin-induced pulmonary fibrosis probably does not replicate most pulmonary fibrosis in humans. Now, I know, people don't have what else to study, but if you have a single pathway, if you don't have a great model to test it, and then you're not sure what your indication would be in the current climate, right? Like aging is not a disease. The FDA is designed to protect the public, so they will it's gonna take like a long time for them to license something that for prevention, right? Like the safety margins are so high. So how can you succeed in this current system, right? Like if something changes, I mean, there are now even lobbying organizations in DC that, are pushing to get aging as an indication and other things. But like, what is your therapy, drug technology looking to address in like the current, ICD codes in the current classification of disease? And how can you like hack the system of regulatory approval that is very long and, has multiple issues?
Yep.
How it's designed the trial? Do you have a good biomarker, right? Like, is your biomarker, or people will report feeling, increased energy level? Let's like, what will you use to quantify? Because I think we've seen with a few companies, like for example, even Unity, right? Like where the science was excellent, the whole idea about senolytics and removing of senescent cells to fight aging, but then the first indication, which was osteoarthritis, led to a negative trial. Now they found some positive data for eye disease, right? But that whole process of maneuvering, not really being, finding the right indication, I think it's really important, and particularly for early stage startups, because, how can you be resilient? How can you be versatile? How can you hack the system to get your drug approved or your therapy approved or technology, for a set of indications right now, and then you can expand further. And, we've seen that with many drugs that are now approved for prevention, and even like statins, and many would argue are the first longevity drugs. So that really is that. And then we also, Salt is very strong on media. So we like teams and founders and companies that care about how they tell their own story. Because that is very important. And, when companies go public, right? Like, what is the current climate? Like, how will Wall Street evaluate your company? Often depends on like your narrative. And I think having that right, being the right voice for your company, for your technology is very, very important. And it's really important that we don't, I think the field of aging just has such a great opportunity right now. So it's really important that we try to stay credible, do the things right, ask for, as much money as we need to do this right, the most efficient way possible, but right, because, we do not want some, hyper snake oil to kill the field. And I think now we have enough critical mass, enough talented people working that's almost impossible. But it's something that I think it's just really important. And that is why you mentioned that even if it's like, that's why I always like, even personally, if I could put something and publish it as a paper and get a peer review and then send it in and talk about it, rather than just write blog posts in which I could just write anything and find any evidence that supports my argument, instead and not including evidence for like something opposite, right? Like is something that I try and do personally. I think people should try and do, because we want to show that this field of aging and longevity medicine is credible, but it's just changing kind of that old status quo of medicine that is, we've ended up living a bit longer, but even that trend is reversing right now, and we're like all very, very sick, and so it's obviously not working and requires big changes.
Wow. Exciting times, and you really have your hand in a lot of areas, Dina. So we've talked longevity medicine, longevity research, advocacy, finance. Any other topics? Anything else that you're involved in on this team that you want to talk about? I'll give you the floor, but I want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Well, I think we've covered it all for now. But if there's, I'm happy to come, again and talk about all the other things we've missed. So let's leave something for next time.
Excellent. It's really you have an amazing journey, and you're so full of energy. I really just enjoyed listening to everything you had to say. I'm going to look forward to doing the next show. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode on our podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Dina Radenkovic. Check out the book Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, or chapter AI and Longevity Medicine. Check for her at the Longevity Investor Conference coming up in a couple of days. Look for the coming up SALT conferences and the SALT Bio Fund. Dina, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk about all these topics with us. Thanks for everything you've been doing. And as we say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through all these initiatives. Really very fascinating work.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Hopefully we live to 200 years so we can do this many, many more times to come.
Absolutely.